I hope you enjoyed this interview with Taylor Sheridan. And if you enjoy the country music interviews that I do here on Summit Country Music, or even if this is the first one you're watching, do you please hit the subscribe button? That would be lovely. Thank you. Taylor Sheridan has already had a rich and varied life as a musician, which includes releasing his first album, Troubadour, last year. And it continues with the release of his new single, Stories. And he's been up to quite a few other things as well. So there's a bit to ask him about. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, how you going?
I'm very well, thank you, and very keen to talk to you about various things, mostly music. But I'm going to start with your childhood. Now, you grew up in Kyneton in Victoria, which is not far from Hanging Rock, so you are a country boy.
I am a country boy, and I'm very proud of that actually.
And so, always on the land as you grew up.
So we actually grew up in a little townhouse, and my dad was always into farming. He grew up in a regional town that was primarily of farmers in a place called Donald,
Mhm.
and he moved to Kyneton where he met my mum, and we lived in a little townhouse, and he was actually a banker, uh, and then got a job as in a carpet shop because he wanted to be closer to us because I was a twin. So I think life got a little bit crazy for them, and then somewhere down the line, I think I was about maybe five, and we just had our my mum and dad have just had their second pregnancy, which was the third baby, and dad got sick with meningococcal, and things just took a bit of a left turn. We thought he was going to die, and we did all our goodbyes and all that sort of stuff, and he miraculously made a recovery, and but he couldn't work full time anymore. So he ended up starting to do this thing, which was basically his passion and has been his passion for his whole life, and that was a mobile animal farm.
Right.
So he was taking it to schools and just doing it as just as a bit of a hobby because we had a few little, a few animals even in our townhouse. And then that eventually grew. And when I was 12, we moved out to a property just outside of Kyneton. And yeah, that's been my life. So I've always been surrounded by animals. I've always been surrounded by the land. But I've also been surrounded by hard decisions and decisions like
Mhm.
that. And one thing I think I learned from a very early age is like you may as well follow your passion. You don't know what's going to happen down the line. So that's something that I think is like instilled in me from those years.
And I mispronounced Clinton when I did the first that question. So you can tell I'm not from Victoria. I'm from New South Wales. But so I'm sorry for that. But I was also thinking of your mum at the point at which your dad got sick and when she had three small children, and that must have been such a stressful time for her.
Yeah, and I think it's only as we've gotten older that we've really been able to sort of get an appreciation of what she might have gone through because everyone in Kyneton knows our family. And for a long time, I just thought that was like a small community country town thing. But I didn't know that we got shipped around to a lot of people's houses during that time.
Right.
So when mum was in hospital and with dad and with a newborn,
Mhm.
me and my brother, we would get shipped to everyone. So and that's probably only in the last 10 years that I've also realized how special that is because every time me and my brother go home, like we sort of thought a lot of people were our uncles and aunties, and
Right.
but that wasn't the case. We were just looked after by so many people in our community. So I'm just what a special thing to be a part of.
Yeah, it is, and I would think it actually gave you a softer landing than you would otherwise have had. And I mean, clearly your parents were people who were valued in the community. That's why those other adults would have wanted to help them. If they'd been ratbags, they wouldn't have taken in you and your brother, I'm sure.
Yeah, and when we go home, like people ask us, like, "How's your mum and dad?" Like, we're not, I'm not Taylor when I go there. I'm Daryl and Denise's son, and I love that. I think it's really humbling, and doesn't matter how much or how little I do, I'll always be, their son, and I've grown to be very fond of that.
Yeah. And still, your father could have not followed his passion. And I'm speaking as someone who has actually been through a really serious illness as well. So I understand that there comes a decision. You can decide to sit on the couch for the rest of your life, or you can propel yourself forward and not even necessarily with a sense of, oh, I could die at any moment. It's more, gee, there is just no time to waste. And so it sounds like he was determined to do that. So he's obviously has quite a lot of strength of character and determination. But also, yes, the value, as you said, in seeing someone following their passion is extraordinary, and you're following yours. So, how long did the mobile animal farm go for? And also, I should ask, what animals were in it?
So even in our little weatherboard house, we had like pigs and rabbits and guinea pigs, and we had a couple of dogs. We even had a deer at one point. In like this is a townhouse. We had a bottle fed deer in our house that had a electric blanket before we did, and that's no joke. So it was the animal farm's still going. He's still doing it, and he
Oh,
worked his
wow.
way up. And actually, now he does the Melbourne show. So,
Right.
like he, like he does, and basically, there's an animal nursery which you can basically people just take their well, a person will take all their animals there, and people can pat them. But Dad's got this kind of persona as Farmer Daryl, and he's got it's quite funny. Like he's got his own hat, and he's got his own like caricature, and it's I mean it's very cringe worthy for me, but it's good as a business perspective. So yeah, he's built his way up to do like the Melbourne show from like getting you know basically a life changing illness
Mhm.
to getting to the top of his field.
Yeah.
That's That's pretty damn impressive, and that's resilience. That is, and for sure, I've definitely looked at that. Even in high school, I was like, I want to do something I love because why not?
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Still not necessarily easy. And also, from what I understand, you didn't have a musical childhood. So there might have been animals around, but of course, they were not playing
Mm.
recorders or flutes.
No, my childhood was yeah, literally getting up before school, feeding calves, feeding lambs, doing all that sort of stuff, and then going to school, and people would be like yawning and stuff, and it's just like we've been up for hours doing this sort of stuff, but I think it wasn't until as a twin, you get compared a lot,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of comparison. And my brother was great at sport,
Okay.
and in a small country town, that's got a lot of value.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I went searching,
Okay.
and people say that knew me, like especially my parents and my family, like I was musical quite early, but I think it was a choice. To be honest, I think it was me trying to find something that I could gravitate towards,
Mhm.
and when I found music, it was just like I found it. It gave me an identity, it gave me purpose, it got me out of my shell, and no one compared me to anyone because no one really did it in our town. So that was even better.
Right. So, what form did that early music interaction or experience take for you? Because I know you entered some competitions,
Mm.
dancing, but was that the first thing you did?
Yeah, so I did my very first kind of public thing was I was asked to do our grade six graduation and to do a solo,
Right.
and it was a song off The Lion King, and all the other kids would be singing in the choir like really quiet, and I wasn't even necessarily because I thought I was good. I really really enjoyed it, so I was like sort of louder than anyone else. So I don't think I got it based off talent or anything like that. I think it was just like, oh, you're pretty enthusiastic about this. So that's how I got it, and it's so funny that today we've got this interview when you're asking me this question because I jumped on my Facebook this morning and my grade prep teacher, who was even old when I was in grade prep, she commented on one of my posts.
Oh, well.
And I haven't seen her since I left primary school, which is a long time ago. And she said something along the lines of, I still remember that little kid who desperately wanted to sing in the choir. I'm so glad you've, followed your passion. So when I say my childhood wasn't necessarily musical,
Hmm.
there was I was very interested in getting into it, and seeing that today, you can't help it, just want to go back to that kid and go, you know what? we're still gonna be chipping away at this.
You're doing all right. But clearly there was something about you that that teacher remembered. And even though you were in
Mm,
the choir, you were given the solo. And you said it wasn't because you were naturally talented, but the singing voice you have now, and if anyone's listening to this interview and hasn't heard you sing, they should immediately go away and listen to the album and listen to the new song. That just does not come from a standing start, if you know what I mean. Like
mm,
something that you worked on over time. So after you had that solo at in primary school, what was the next evolution for your voice? Because as you become a teenager, of course, for a young boy, your voice is going to break at a certain point. So you could be a great child singer and then hit your teens and it's all over. So
mm.
how did that work for you as a singer?
Yeah, it was difficult, to be honest, because I was singing Michael Jackson as a kid. That was my first kind of moment, like, I saw it on TV. It came up. It was the 30th anniversary of his solo career at Madison Square Garden. I still remember exactly where I was. I got a VHS out, I taped it, and I just sat in front of that and just rewound and watched it, watched it, watched it. So I'd be singing "The Way You Make Me Feel," Billie Jean, and I'd be clearing those notes with not even thinking about it. It was just, and that's how I started entering into competitions. I went into this competition. Me and my dad, we were doing the Animal Farm at a place called Ashburton, which is in Victoria,
Mhm.
and they had an Ashburton Idol. And for some reason, I had my Michael Jackson clothes in there. And I remember the lady saying, "Oh, there's an Ashburton Idol here." And Dad goes, "Oh, well, my son can sing. Like, why doesn't he go into it? Like, can you get him in?" And I remember she took me and we went to the desk and they said, "Oh, there's no applicants allowed on the day." And she
Right.
said, "But he's the next Shannon Knoll." I still remember that so vividly. That was when, basically when, Guy and Shannon were the it people. And I ended up winning.
So you
And
were the next, well, you're actually the next Guy Sebastian, technically, on that.
well, yeah, 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 on that front, a little bit more popular than I Shannon. But and then, yeah, me and Mum just kind of went around Victoria and just started going into these competitions, and I would win all of them.
Right.
And it was amazing and it was good because that's where the love of my hat also came into play as well. And what I would do is I would put it like that so no one could see me.
Right.
And I would just do it, and then I'd get booked for little corporates, and I was like this little weird Michael Jackson kid, but I could, do this stuff, and
Right.
then my voice broke,
Right.
and the game changed
Mhm.
like that. And I reckon it took me 3 years to find my way back to some sort of like stylistically and like
Mhm.
what like my tone of voice. Like it just wasn't, yeah, it was a really big arm wrestle for me. I remember it being quite painful.
I just think it would be so odd, really, for us, for specifically boys singers. Actually, it's hard enough for boys when their voices change and they're changing without their control and they're going up and they're going down. But when you're used to using your voice for as an instrument and you love what you're doing, and clearly you're very successful at it as a child, and yeah, I would imagine it's actually tied up with your sense of self, and there is enough going on with sense of self as a teenager as it is.
Yeah, and I think I like, and there was definitely a little bit of like early bullying in those,
Hmm.
like before my voice broke. There was
Right.
definitely, I went to like a Catholic school, a private school, like I sang the national anthem at our local races, and then I did it at like the local school, like at the assembly, and then like when I noticed that there was a little bit of like bullying happening, there were things that I would, go to. There were things that I wanted to go to that I wouldn't end up rocking up to, like choir in high school. I remember you had to wear casual clothes to go to school. If you wanted to go to choir, you could wear casual clothes. And my parents were just like, "You're doing it," and I was like, "Well, I want to do it, but I'm just so scared of like, of being the minority."
Right.
And it wasn't so much that I didn't mind standing out. I was standing out for I was getting negative attention.
Hmm.
And then and I remember I went to this classroom to go into, to audition for the choir, and I left and I never went in. And I actually ended up walking down the street until the bell went.
Right.
So I was so scared. And it's so funny now when I talk to kids, I always say I only have one regret, and that's not going into that classroom.
Right.
because I let fear get in the way. So I guess then when my voice broke, I guess it was like a little bit of relief. It's like, oh, maybe I can't do this anymore,
Okay.
and maybe I won't get picked on. But then you still get picked on, and you're like, well, I still love music, and that's when I started playing guitar
Right.
because I was like, well, if I can't sing, I may as well be a guitarist. And then the years that I really struggled as a vocalist, I started playing guitar, and that's kind of when that all. And then eventually they both married up, and I have the voice that I have today. But it took a lot of work and a lot of persistence.
Yeah, and that wonderful Australian tall poppy syndrome that seems to kick in primary school and continues through high school and into adulthood for that matter. So when you started playing guitar and forging a different musical identity, shall we say, did your taste in the music you were listening to change as well? Because you were obviously trying to work out who you were as a musician.
Definitely. Like when I was younger, the albums that I loved was Stevie Wonder. I loved Michael Jackson. I loved these guys that could sing so high. When I heard Pete Murray, the game changed. The game changed. I went, oh, you can still have effect with the tone of your voice.
Hmm.
Votes, notes don't always get the votes.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, okay. And then, John Mayer came into my world, and then Leor came into my world. And, these beautiful Powderfinger and, these bands that Something for Kate, um, these artists that didn't necessarily sing right up in their register, but like just had as much of an impact. James Taylor, he was a massive one for me. Like, he barely goes outside of his range, but his voice is so powerful.
Hmm.
So then I started realizing that, okay, if I work on the tone of my voice, that can be my edge, not necessarily the notes. And even now, I don't really have that big of a range, really. I've worked on it, but there are a lot of singers that can, sing rings around me. But I think it's the tone of my voice that I've really tried to, perfect over the years, to perfect to my ears anyway, and the way that I like my voice to sound.
So did you go to any vocal coaching at the time, like in your late teens, for example, as you were thinking about the tone of your voice, or was it really just that you were training your ear to the point where you could recognize in yourself what you were looking for?
So I had singing lessons at school, and that was, I mean, looking back on it, I think it was more of just kind of a bit of a bludge session, really. Like, she'd play a few scales, and it's just like, okay, great. And she didn't really know what to do with a male voice, especially one that didn't have much range.
Yeah.
So that's when I started writing songs because the songs that I tried to play, I just couldn't hit.
Right.
Like at that time, Robbie Williams was big, and there was just some big, it was big singers.
Mhm.
And I wasn't that sort of singer. And I didn't want to be that sort of singer either. I wanted to feel how Pete Murray made me feel when I listened to his albums.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do that to someone or have that effect on someone. So that's when I started writing songs. And those early years, the beautiful thing about writing music is that when you write a song, it doesn't matter how good or how bad it is. You're just so excited that you've written something and it's yours. So I look back on them and they were awful, but at the time you think like you're a genius.
Well, it is amazing to write a song, so I think justifiably you think you're a genius. But I'm semi laughing while you're talking about the like having a lack of range, so to speak, in your voice. Because when I was listening to the album, I was thinking, oh, he's such a versatile singer. Um, but your point about tone is absolutely spot on because tone is actually something I think that probably pulls an emotional response out of a listener more than range does. Because range can technically sound good, but it can leave you cold. And we can see that in some vocal competitions, for example, on television, where there's someone who's going all up and down a scale, but you just don't feel anything. But someone comes along with a beautiful tone, and that you feel it. There's a resonance.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's also why I started listening to music with really deep lyrics, and like I started paying more attention to lyric writing and, different chords and just trying to figure out the nuances rather than just being like, all right, I don't want to be the best because I'm clearly not. So how can I be the best version of me that I can be? And what can I bring to the table? And what do I value?
Mhm.
So that's yeah, that's kind of how that all went.
So once you had some songs of your own, was gigging the next thing, or did you join a band at any stage?
Yeah, I did actually. My first band was in year seven with my primary school friends, and we're in a band called Schnitzel Flinger. You've
Not
probably
a
heard
bad
of
title.
us.
Yeah.
You definitely haven't. We didn't last long, but we played songs like, oh, what did we do? We did some things like Red Hot Chili Peppers and Seven Nation Army, and it just wasn't for me. Like, I think at that time I was like, cool, I'm in a band. Like maybe I can shift this like weird Michael Jackson high kid sounding, and I can like sing. And it just, I had too much soul for a kid that wanted to sing, punk or, rock for that matter.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I started writing songs and started sort of playing them at school concerts, and then the attitude towards me started changing. Like I grew my hair out really long, and I don't know, I just felt like I had a bit of a different approach, but I was getting closer to who I was when I was
Mhm.
writing music, I felt.
Okay.
And that was those years were really important, I think. Like, not that any of the songs are memorable and, I don't think I'd like to go back and revisit any of those recordings, but they were so, so important. And, when I left high school and went to uni, that's kind of when my songwriting really accelerated because I went from a kid in a country town that no one really did it
Hmm.
but to answer your question about gigs, my mum would take me down to the Shamrock Hotel in Kyneton every Sunday, and there was this guy playing there. His name was Hayden Evans, and he would play, Opportunity on guitar, Pete Murray, and we'd play some Keith Urban, and I loved it. I thought he was a superhero. I still see him now, and he goes, "Ah, I inspired you, young fella." And then I started playing at that pub when I was about 17,
Right.
and the whole town would come out. Like seriously, the whole town, it would be packed. And I only reckon I knew probably like 10 songs. But like, going back to what I said before about like getting palmed around to a lot of different families and stuff, like I think people just wanted to also see me succeed.
Hmm.
So I started playing at the pub, I started playing at Christmas parties, at birthdays, at weddings, and I was just playing, other people's music. So even before I left high school, I was kind of making a little bit of cash.
Hmm.
And yeah, and then, I actually started winning competitions again.
Right.
Believe it or not, I would go in and sing with me and my guitar, and and I would do like relatively well. And I was one of the vocalists in the state school spectacular,
Right.
which was massive at the time. I was in year 12, and that was when I started, really starting to go, oh, okay, I think there's some building blocks here.
Okay. So at university, did you study a Bachelor of Music?
I did, yeah. I studied for 2 years,
Mhm.
and that was the best thing I could have done because I was a big fish. Sorry, I was a small fish in a big pond,
Right.
and everyone else, I kind of got to a point where like, I felt like I was a pretty good male singer, like
Hmm.
compared to the girls. No, I was not even close. But I was like, oh, I'm an okay male singer. I'm kind of in the mid. When I got to uni, I reckon I was the worst,
Right.
in my opinion.
Okay.
And it that was when the work started. That's when I accelerated quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting sort of listening to you talking about your childhood, the things that happened with your father in particular, and watching him work hard to achieve something he wanted to while following his passion. I think that lesson um, about work being needed actually to execute the
Mm,
passion, if that makes sense. That it's just not just a matter of having a dream and saying that dream will come true. It's actually step by step you can work towards it and you can actually get somewhere. So going through that Bachelor of Music, obviously you were still performing because at a certain point you were supporting Taxiride and then you ended up
mm.
being in the band for 5 years. So at what point did that happen?
So I ended up went to uni, and I was still gigging and doing a few little bits and pieces, but not much. But the other kids in well, I shouldn't say kids, we're all adults then. You know, a lot of the other people in my year level, they just, I guess, wanted to be teachers. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a performer. And like, you know, they're just like, oh, you know, there's no music in money. There's no money in music. Sorry. So we're just gonna, you know, be teachers. And it was kind of like, really? But you guys are all so good. Like, if I think I can make it, you guys can definitely make it. So I think when I left uni, it was good because they all sort of stayed, and I went off, and I was like, no, I'm gonna give this a go. And then I ended up joining a wedding band, and I did weddings for I reckon about 5 years, and we ended up being booked out like 3 nights a week, getting really good money, and I ended up getting a vocal polyp,
Oh.
and that was, you know, another moment of, you know, I remember I was in Swan Hill and I went to sing and nothing came out. And yeah, I had to go and have surgery on that. And, you know, you never know if your voice is going to come back on one of those things, like, or if it's
Mhm.
going to be different. And, you know, I had to be quiet. I don't think I spoke for 2 weeks. Then you got to slowly introduce singing again. You know, it took me probably 6 months to get back on my feet. It took me about 12 months to get back to where I was.
Mhm.
And I remember I quit the wedding band. And I said to the guitar player who we were kind of managing it together, I said, I'm never, ever going to sing a note I don't believe in again. I've
Right.
been really, really fortunate to have another go at this. I'm going to go out and play my own music. I don't care where it lands, but I'm not going to be the guy that says, what if?
Mhm.
And I was about 24-ish. And then I ended up getting with a booking agency. Um, called Premier Artists, and one of them, they came to one of my gigs in Kyneton, and yeah, I ended up going with them, and that was when I started getting some bigger supports,
Okay.
you know, and that's when I really had to start writing better music because I was like, oh, this stuff isn't flying,
Okay.
you know, and I wasn't, I still was trying to figure out my edge, like, was I trying to be, you know, this kind of Stevie Wonder acoustic guy? Was I trying to be a storyteller? Was I trying to be, you know, Mr. Funny? Was I trying to be Mr. Sensitive? It's like, I didn't know. You know,
Mhm.
every time I get on stage, it was kind of, it was just a bit of a, oh God, thank God that went well, you know, situation.
Yeah.
So I did supports for, I mean, I'm still doing supports, but at that time I was doing, you know, supports every weekend and I was supporting everyone you can poke a stick at. I was doing, oh, in those early years, Tex Perkins. I was supporting John Stevens. I was supporting. Oh, who else did I? Oh, there was 1927, and you know, it got to the point where I got to open for Taxiride, and I was opening for them at Melbourne Public, and the venue had actually booked me because I was playing cover gigs there, and they wanted me to play primarily covers, and I was like, oh man, what an opportunity missed. So I did, and I don't think the band were all that happy with me because they
Right.
were like, we're an original band. Like we want an original artist opening for us. And I was like, that was what I was asked to do. So nothing happened that night. I got a few things signed from them because I love the band and, you know, I loved them when I was a kid. And fast forward maybe 2 years later and we're on a red hot summer and I'm playing my own music and things are getting a little bit better. And I remember I was backstage at Dubbo and I knew the chords to Get Set. And I played a B major, and I turned around and I was just being a, you know, it's a bit tongue in cheek. I didn't even think, like, I didn't even know the guys. And for me to think so boldly that I could play their own song to them, like, how, God, I'd love to go back to that kid and give him a little clip over the ears. But I started playing this chord and I went to the second chord and he goes, that's wrong. I went, oh, and he corrected it. All the guys then came and watched me from the front of the stage. And I was like, how cool is this? Taxi Ride came to see me. Like, what a privilege, and that's amazing, and et cetera, et cetera. I got to open for him, and then I got this call when I was away on the peninsula, and they just said, "Hey, one of the guys doesn't want to tour anymore. Would you be interested in having the job?" And I was like, "For sure. When's the first gig?" And they said, "In 10 days."
Right.
It's like, gotcha. So I went to work, and that was how I got the job in Taxiride.
Now you said a couple of minutes ago, I'm still playing supports. The support you've been playing the last little while has been for Jimmy Barnes, so it's a pretty significant support. So you played with Barnesy on his tour last year. In fact, at the time I'm speaking to you, you have been on tour with him again, and you've got a couple of shows left. So I imagine that's been an interesting ride.
That's been incredible. I mean, Jimmy, it's there's a couple of artists in our industry that are just the untouchables. I call the untouchables, and Jimmy is one of them. He's, such an icon in our industry, and just super inspiring. And if you want to talk about resilience, well, he's got it in spades.
Mhm.
And I ended up, I know his daughter quite well, Mahalia, and she asked me, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, and she said, "Oh, Mum's going out on tour as the Jane Barnes Band. Would you like to open?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." And I flew up to Lizottes and had one show, and yeah, and at the encore, Jimmy's like, "Hey, do you want to get up and sing something with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I know all of them, so you just pick." And he's like, "Let's do When the War Is Over." I'm like, "Great." And we sang When the War Is Over together, and it was, a moment in time that I'll, never forget. And he came over, he put his arm around my shoulder, and just made, in that moment, just sort of was just like, "Enjoy this, Taylor. Like, this is pretty special." And I did, never thinking I'd get the chance to do it again. But that night he said to me, "We're going to do this again." I thought, great. Fast forward 18 months later, I get asked to do another tour. He was going on an acoustic run, and I thought, well, he's never ever going to do an acoustic tour again. And I'd seen Jimmy with, like, bigger supports than me, like the Teskey brothers, and he can, oh God, he can get anyone. So when I got that run, I just thought, this is a moment in time that will never be duplicated and never be replicated, because when's the chance? Like, when's he ever going to do an acoustic run again?
Mhm.
And want an acoustic solo guy that tells stories and wears a hat, like. And then this tour came around, and I got the call again, and it was just like, yeah. I remember I was flying in from Adelaide, and I landed on the tarmac and turned my Wi-Fi on, and I got an email saying, "Hey mate, you've got the whole run." It's just like, even when I say it, I get goosebumps, because that just to be in this industry and get a call like that,
Mhm.
that's what it's all about. And not everyone gets that call, and I'm so aware of that. So for me, it's a dream come true, and I know that sounds corny, but it just reaffirms that it was the right decision all those years ago to follow my passion.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and it's also about you mindfully working towards this dream coming true. And you said something a little while ago when you got that polyp on your vocal cords, and you said, "I'm never going to sing another note I don't believe in," and that suggests to me that you understand, yeah, the body mind connection. For if people want to phrase it like that, that's how I would phrase it, because it's almost as if you're aware that singing those cover songs that you didn't believe in had actually generated this
Mhm.
literal blockage in your voice. And in order to free that up, you had, and to free your creative spirit and flow, you had to do things you believed in. So you have committed yourself to that. It's not the easier path, I think, except that it can sometimes feel like the only path when you're being authentic to your artistry. And that's what it seems like it is with you. Like, just listening to you talk, it seems like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. After that polyp, it was such a blessing in disguise, and it did change my voice, and like, I am different from the person I was then, not just vocally, but the way that I approach things spiritually. Like, it did change me, but I think it changed me in a way of being more appreciative of what I have and what I can bring to the table, and just being the best version of me that I can be.
Mhm.
That's my goal. That is my only goal. I only want to be the best Taylor Sheridan that is, and I'm just still trying to find and still trying to dig out, what makes me me.
But again, not the easiest path, I don't think. But yeah, because I totally understand where you're coming from. But I think it does require that constant commitment, and especially as an artist, when there are a lot of signals you could be getting at what you should be doing, which musical direction to take. On Troubadour, your album that came out last year, I think we actually saw a great range of your
Mm.
artistry, and You have the single stories out this year. Now, this year has been quite busy for you, apart from the tour with Barnsey. You have the single out and you have a baby, a newborn baby. So, all I'm going to ask you about the baby is she sleeping through the night? Because that's the most important question.
Hell no. No, she's not sleeping during the night. And it has been the everything in my life worth having, I've had to work at. Mabel was no different.
Right.
We struggled to start a family, and it wasn't a guarantee for us. When she came into our life on the 6th of December at 12:16, that was the moment that I thought, whatever happens from now on is a bonus. She is everything to me. She's everything I've ever wanted, everything that, like, I love music. I love my I don't know, I love the way that I navigate the world. I love the way I see the world. When she was born, it was like everything fell into place.
Right.
And I'm so glad I've got Troubadour now before she was born,
Hmm.
because that clearly shows who I was then.
Hmm.
And I was so present in that. I knew that she was coming at the end of Troubadour.
Right.
And I really, really wanted to put a bookend to that artistically, because I knew, like, I knew that when she came along, it was going to be such a change and such a beautiful new chapter. But would I have made Troubadour with her? Probably not.
Hmm.
And when you talked about before about it's a hard road, and it's a constant decision to keep putting your name in the game. Like, you know, some people say that they don't ever think of quitting. I think of quitting every day, every single day. I think of quitting, and but I don't.
Mm.
Keep going, keep writing, I keep performing, and it's like, okay, not today,
Yeah.
because you've got both. You've got your logical brain, which is like, hey, there's a much easier route, and then you've got your, I don't know, that other side of the brain that's like, but this is so worthwhile. Like,
Hmm.
and that's where stories came from. Like, stories came from a moment of me being like, I don't know how much longer I can do this for. Because, if we're going to be honest, in some ways, I thought Troubadour was it for me.
Right.
And that's why I went so hard with it. And that's why I threw so many styles at that album, because I always get asked, what sort of artist are you? And like, I love music and I'm inspired by so much. My common thread that I feel like I look for in, my own music is, does it tell me a story or not? Does it make me feel something? So Troubadour, in whether it be country music, whether it be folk music, whether it be soul music, there's stories in all of those genres.
Hmm.
And and Troubadour was an album of self-discovery and to go, this is who I am, and I did it. And I did it independently, and it was hard, and it took everything I had. But I thought it was gonna be the end. I was gonna ride off into the sunset and at least have had my moment to go, well, if you ever wanted to know who I am,
Hmm.
this is it.
Hmm.
Then Mabel came along, and it didn't become so much about me. It was like, oh wow, I would love for you to not have that small town mentality that I had, of like living in your hometown, which I thought I'd always do. I'd buy a job. Sorry, I'd have a job in my hometown. I'd probably marry someone that I went to school with. And then as I've gotten older, I've done none of those. I've had a much bigger life than I thought I would.
Hmm.
I want to instill into Mabel that, like, she can do anything. She didn't have to live where she grew up.
Hmm.
She can live anywhere in the world. I want her to have a really big life. And that's where stories came from. It's like, that was also like an affirmation for me to be like, keep going, because we're just adding to this incredible story that I'll
Yeah.
be able to share with Mabel and share with my partner and share with the people that care about my music and the people, my grade prep teacher.
Yeah.
Like, how many people get their grade prep teacher messaging being like, good on you and proud of you. Like, that's, as you can probably tell from how we've been chatting, I'm very nostalgic, and I really, hold that stuff close to my heart. So in those moments when you think, oh, this is getting a bit too difficult or whatever, a song like Stories was a nice one to write because it was just a way of being like, we can keep doing this and we can keep creating something like really, really special. It's always gonna be hard.
Hmm.
You know, look at the first verse, talking about that I didn't go to class because I was
Yeah.
learning guitar. Like that's true. And I messaged that teacher. I messaged her before that song came out, and I said, "Hey, there's a verse about you."
The
I
teacher who
still,
passed you anyway.
yeah,
Yeah. You were going
and
to fail school, but the teacher passed you.
and she passed me. And I remember I went, and when I was, I got my results and I saw that she passed me, and I went to her office, and she said, "Taylor, I think your skills might lie outside the classroom."
Right.
Things like that, they lead you on a path.
Yeah.
And things get difficult, they're the things that I remember to keep me going.
Well, and I think, nostalgia can get a bad rap, but that's also about storytelling, nostalgia. It's about the stories that have formed us thus far. And I think it's quite okay to look back at them with fondness. Well, it's actually lucky if you can look back at them with fondness. Some people don't have the luxury of nostalgia, I guess. It's like sometimes the stories are really difficult. Now, but this song Stories you recorded with M Squared, Michael Dillaredis and Michael Painter, whose names keep coming up pretty much every song I'm covering at the moment. It's M Squared. I don't know when they sleep, but obviously you found a slot when they were awake.
Yeah, so when I found out that I was getting this tour, I could have either, used the Troubadour thing and just, still kept leveraging that, which, I still feel very connected to that album. Like, I'm still trying to wean off it because I just gave everything to it. But I wanted something fresh, but I only had a really short amount of time. I had 15 weeks from the moment I had the call to the very first show.
Right.
So I had to get cracking. And having a baby that was 8 weeks at the time, maybe, I was getting up at like 5 in the morning, trying to write, trying to figure something out, trying to conjure something up, and nothing was coming. And it was quite disheartening. And I was just like, what sort of song would I like to listen to at the moment? And I thought, well, I would like this sort of song, and I'd like to, to be a little bit country, but I'd like it to have a little bit of like, gospel choir vocals, and I'd like the lyrics to be, this way. So that's how that song came. And I was chipping away at that song until literally the day that we were recording it. And I called M Squared because I toured with Michael Painter last year because he was in Jimmy's band.
Right.
And I remember Jimmy come up to me and he goes, so when are you doing your next record? That's a very bad impression of that.
It's not too bad.
It was bad. It was bad. Don't show him that. And I said, oh, I'm not sure. And Michael Painter comes over and he goes, oh, you're doing it with me, aren't you, Taylor? I went, yeah, I will. And then I didn't really think much of it. And I thought, who am I going to do how am I going to do this? And I called up the boys and I said, look, I know it's really late notice, but, if you're up for it, let's do it. And they said, yeah, let's do it. And we did it Anzac Day week. And it took us 3 days, and which is the quickest I've ever worked. Troubadour took 2 years.
Yeah, right.
So it was the quickest we'd ever worked. And it was also nice to to be a collaboration
Hmm.
rather than, me just so Troubadour was just so, oh my God, I was just an obsessed, crazed person with Troubadour. And with this one, I remember Michael Painter saying to me, like, is this weird? Like, sort of producing it with us. And I was like, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the different flavors that are coming from it. And there were sounds in the song that challenged me too. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. But rather than me shutting them down, I kept them. And then, as time went on, I'm like, no, I really like that. So I learned a lot from the process too. And I got to see, two of the people that, are just killing it in the game, how they work and how you need to be efficient and working to a deadline. Because it was the first time that I'd ever had to work to a deadline.
Right. Yeah, they seem to have a very well-oiled machine, but also everyone seems to really love working with them. And I've spoken to some artists who singers, as in particularly focused on their singing, and they said Michael's been able to draw things out of their voice. Now, I don't know that Michael might have been able to teach you anything about your voice, but was it interesting working with him as a singer?
Oh, I think, well, he's just incredible. Like, he's probably the best singer I've ever seen in
Right.
person.
Okay.
So I was really up for, I think what his gift to us was melody. He, in some blind spots that I thought, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. He'd be like, oh, why don't we do this? And it was just so minor, but like, it's like, oh, that's really, and yeah, the hooks, they just make him even more hookier.
Right.
So I don't think he necessarily taught me anything about my own voice, because he just said, I want you to be you.
Hmm.
And something that I'm leaning more into is, leaning more into my accent and leaning more into being authentic. And that's what I said. I'm not here to be anyone else. I'm here for the M squared thing, but I'm
Right.
here to be me.
Right.
So that was a really good thing to figure out, that balance of like, and Mike was like, I just want you to be you, but we're going to package this in a different way. And we did. And I love it. I really, and now I listen to it and I still enjoy it. Sometimes I listen to Troubadour and it's like, oh, I would have done that different, or would have done that different. And that's just because I overanalyze it to an inch of its life.
Yeah.
But with stories, it was like a photograph that I look at now and I go, that was like such a beautiful moment in time of trying to, and I close it on the Jimmy tour. That's the song I close with.
Right.
And they get the crowd clapping at the end, and it's just like this like really beautiful moment that I dreamt about it sitting here. I wrote it here pretty much, and going like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if the crowd were clapping, and to have them and to look to the side of me and like Mabel's side of stage. It's like this whole 360, and yeah, I'm living it. I'm loving it.
Well, I could certainly tell that. And I also think that's a lovely note to end on because I've had you talking for quite a while. I feel like I could keep talking to you for another 2 hours, Taylor, but I should wrap it up because you do have a small child who's keeping you up at night. You are playing quite a lot of shows in the foreseeable future, so I will put a list of those shows with this interview and people can catch you in various parts of Australia. For the time being, it's been such a great pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you. Yeah, these questions have been like really awesome. So thank you so much.